This is Elizabeth Creamer. I'm a newly retired faculty member from the School of Education at Virginia Tech, and I prepared this brief YouTube to give you sort of a bird's eye view of my new SAGE textbook, An Introduction to Fully Integrated Mixed Methods Research. I want to tell you a little bit about its key features and to summarize some important conceptual ways that it departs from the previous foundational literature in mixed methods research. So I want to tell you first a little bit about myself and how I came to mixed methods research, my journey there. And then, as I said, I want to give you sort of a bird's eye view about the key features of my textbook and probably the parts of it that are the greatest contribution, or the greatest contribution, the greatest way to sort of view it as moving the field forward. So when I look at my own background and how I came to mixed methods research, I want to say that, like most people in my generation whose PhD was occurred in the 1980s, my training was strictly quantitative, but I have to say that my mindset and orientation is qualitative, and I think that most schoolings and health-related and well-being-related questions really lend themselves to qualitative research. So over the course of my career, I've taught both intro and advanced mixed methods courses, as well as intro and advanced qualitative courses, and I've really been doing that for almost 20 years. I was lucky to have been trained at an excellent high school in the 60s at the height of the civil rights movement. Now, the reason I mention that only is that I think it explains a second orientation of mine, which is a great interest in transformative research, a great interest in feminist research, great interest in research that seeks to understand and change inequality. And I trace that back to some really excellent teachers in my high school. I did a stint as a faculty member in a Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, and it was really my conviction about the importance of interdisciplinarity, that what can be gained when you combine different disciplines, that was really the first clear step into mixed methods. Then there was really sort of a very pragmatic reason why I got into mixed methods. And in the early days, the pragmatism was way ahead of my knowledge of mixed methods. And that was, I was interested in a fundamentally qualitative question about a construct that's called self-authorship. But no funder was interested in a qualitative study. But as soon as I framed it as a quantitative, as a study that had a quantitative as well as a qualitative component, the funders became interested, and I was quite fortunate to be involved in that kind of large-scale research for between 2004 and 2013. Part of what also led me to an interest in mixed methods research came out of that external funding that I just mentioned, and the experiences of encountering very different interpretations from the qualitative and the quantitative research. And I grew to see that as not a negative thing, but a very positive thing. So an interest in contradiction, in paradox, in gaps and silences that Jennifer Green refers to is also something that motivated me or created an awareness of a great fit with mixed methods. If there was a single article that I've written that summarizes the text, it's this article that I am showing on this slide. I wrote this article literally a month after I had pushed the button and sent the whole book to the publisher, and it really sort of reviews each chapter with one tight paragraph. So it gives you a quick overview of the text in written form. I think in the right box, you're seeing the single sentence from that text that really has motivated my future, the work after the textbook, as well as reflects the sentiment of the textbook. And that is the statement that affixing a mixed method label to a publication is a way to declare that the logic of mixing is central to the purpose of the study and for understanding its conclusions. And mixing refers to the integration of the qualitative and quantitative sources of data or analytical procedures. There are many definitions of mixed methods research. They share a common feature, which is a commitment to that idea of mixing / integrating of qual and quant in some significant and substantive ways. And the way that my own definition departs from far more well-known ones by Creswell and Plano-Clark, for example, is that I have centered this idea of engaging multiple perspectives in my definition of mixed methods research. Not everyone foregrounds that, but to me that reflects the idea of what Jennifer Green calls a mixed method way of thinking. So I define it as a systematic, aka empirical approach to data collection and analysis that combines qualitative and quantitative data and analytical procedures, not just data, with the intention to engage multiple perspectives in order to more fully understand a complex social phenomena. If there is one thing that is suitable or explains mixed methods research in its phenomenal popularity, is the growth of the ability and the software and the technology to study complex multi-level social problems. So those involve people and environments, whether they're health or education or something else. When I shift to talking about features that distinguish my textbook, let me say just a couple things about it. And this is the cover of it on the left, and I'll tell you in a minute why I use arches. First of all, it's called an introduction. There are only 2 other textbooks that are introductions to mixed methods research. Second of all, I'd say there is no other textbook that is introductory that is so qualitatively oriented. That is my disposition. That is the nature of my interest. A third feature that distinguishes the text is that it departs from the long-standing emphasis that we see on the literature on a basic set of core designs. I talk about them in one chapter, chapter 4, and then I move away from thinking that that is the most important thing to talk about when you're talking about mixed methods research and mixed methods research publications. 4 is what really distinguishes it. I think there's only one other person that is doing this or is foregrounding it so thoroughly, and that is Pat Baisley, and she has just come out with a new book, a 2018 book, that picks up on the idea of integration at many phases of the research process. That is the core distinction of my text. The focus is on how do you integrate qualitative data and quantitative data throughout the research process. It's not saying that you have to do that to be mixed methods, but it is saying that it is possible and can have some very promising results. I too, like Creswell and Plano-Clark, feature exemplars, but I do them in a much more detailed way in that I look at not only the way they mixed, but the type of conclusions that they're able to make by mixing. So those are 5 features that distinguish the text. I mentioned the fully integrated idea and that's in the title. Tedley and Tashikori actually proposed that idea in their original textbook, an introductory textbook as well, but they didn't really manifest it or apply it or find examples of it. It was just really an idea that they proposed. And I found that indeed in the literature there are examples of fully integrated mixed methods research. Although I want to emphasize again, this isn't a have to for mixed methods research. It's just the idea of framing an entire study as a mixed method way of thinking. So the fully integrated mixed methods research idea is that it's possible to mix qualitative and quantitative in the way you write your research questions by having a qual and a quant research question and a mixing research question. It's possible to mix them during data collection, and I have a chapter about that. It's possible to mix during data analysis. I have 2 chapters about that. And it's possible to mix when drawing conclusions. It's my contention that up until now, and with the core designs, the mentality had really been that the mixing necessarily only occurred at that last stage. So you had a qual phase, you had a quant phase. They could have occurred simultaneously or sequentially, but you only brought them together at the conclusion stage. I think that really undersells the potential of mixed methods research, and it's not difficult to find examples of people that do far more than wait to the last stage to integrate the two. I mentioned that I use some exemplars in my textbook, and that was one of the features of the textbook. Those really cover a broad range of topics, and I was very, very purposeful about that. It's not just education. There's some in the health context as well. And here are some examples of some of the exemplars that I use. Most, but not all, of the chapters have an exemplar. And the advantage of these is to give you examples that you can use to model your own study. So rather than the core designs, I believe that the exemplars, if you study them, give you an idea about a way to construct a complex study that really takes advantage or leverages mixed methods. So these are all complex studies that are very hard to pigeonhole in whether they're sequential or concurrent. That's language that's used because they're often multi-phase, often highly iterative between the qual and the quant phase. And that's the nature of the studies, the exemplars, that had to do with my sort of shift of thinking and my shift of emphasis in the text. One of the features of the text is that I use the same template to summarize every exemplar, each of the 9 exemplars. Those are all in an appendix. It's sort of like a quick and dirty summary of the article to see if it's one that might be useful for you to take a look at as a model for your own research. And I break them down by looking at where the mixing occurs. So this is dividing the mixing out by phase and identifies those that are fully integrated or not. The other thing that I think is pretty cool about it is it's the first time that anyone has really pursued the idea of meta-inferences. And what does a meta-inference look like, and how are the qual and quant conclusions combined to create a meta-inference? And that's this part of the template. Then it really tries to tease out in the value-added section what exactly was gained by using mixed methods research. Now, another key feature of the text is the use jumped forward there, is the use of the metaphor of an arch. And I hope it's understood that that is done in a kind of playful way, a creative way, I hope. I originally conceived the arch in a more traditional way than I now conceive it. So in the very traditional way, which is still useful, if you look at this picture of an arch from France that I took, you could imagine that the qual is one arm and the quant is another. And if you follow the very traditional sort of idea, the way the core designs are imagined, when that keystone, and that's the part up here at the top of the arch, is dropped in, that represents to me the meta-inference, what brings the qual and the quant together in a conclusion. So that's a very conventional view of mixed methods, that it's combining or linking qualitative and quantitative data. I've come to see mixed methods as really more interactive, and that is evidenced in the arch in ways you can't see. So an arch can stand alone with a meta-inference, with a keystone, without any surrounding building, because of all of the interaction and pressure that goes between these sides. So it's actually constructed in a frame, and then the keystone is dropped in at the end. So I think it also captures the idea of the tension and interaction that occurs throughout the research in these complex studies that I examine more thoroughly. I introduce an idea in the text that I refer to as mixed priority. In the traditional conventional core literature, they talk about three kinds of priority in mixed methods research. I think that reflects a combination logic. So one priority is that quant is dominant, and in fact, most research in the past has documented that mixed methods in the past has tended to be quant dominated. In other words, often the qual phase plays a weaker role in constructing the conclusions. So in traditional schemas, it's quant dominant, qual dominant, or the rare case of equal dominant. I think that gives short shrift to the idea that key conclusions can emerge when the two sources of data are mixed, particularly during analysis. I use the label mixed priority that most readily applies to these studies where mixing occurs in multiple phases, possibly throughout. So one of the principal conclusions I reached, and that reflects sort of my shift away from the core set of designs, came from, as I implied a little bit earlier, a study of the exemplars. Now, I didn't start the book with 9 exemplars. I had, as this drawer shows, 100 of potential examples of exemplars, and that's why I have that drawer. And for every one of the 9 I picked, I probably discarded 40. But what I discarded was not because of mixing. What I was looking for was transparency about mixed methods. So what I was looking for were authors who were very clear about why they use mixed methods, how they use mixed methods. And that was my key sorting criteria. Plus, I wanted to have a variety of disciplines represented. I didn't want to have them all from a single discipline or a single journal. And what I concluded from that analysis, where really I could see how fully integrated was actually actualized in practice. There's a lot of people doing good research, doing good mixed methods research, who don't honestly show a lot of knowledge of the methodological literature if you look at their reference list. Now, the ones that are transparent, they're transparent about the purpose, or they're transparent about labeling their design. they do tend to sow knowledge of the literature. But there is some very creative mixed methods research being done by people who probably don't know a whole lot about what methodologists write about mixed methods. So I came to the conclusion along about chapter 4 of my book, so I didn't start with this mindset. Maybe I shouldn't confess that in this case, practice is way ahead of what we're seeing in the literature, that there are more creative examples than I think the literature often acknowledges, or particularly the textbook acknowledge. So a lot of what I learned is from the examples, and it's very common in mixed methods for people to write using examples, publications, and it's from those examples that you are seeing some creative ways of mixing, probably that people could not even envision at the time they launched their studies. So many opportunities for mixing, for integrating the qual and the quant, don't come until you're up to your elbows in the data, until you're up to your elbows in tussling and trying to understand your qual and your quant data. So I want to wrap up with just a little information about other resources I have. If you found this video, you'll probably realize that I have a YouTube channel, thanks to the encouragement of my students. And in that, I will ultimately have a 15 to 20 minute overview of each chapter, as well as this brief overview or key findings, or sort of bird's eye view of the text. On the right, what you're seeing is the front page of my webpage, Mixed Methods Research in the News. And in there, I try to identify more examples, often from the natural sciences, of people using mixed methods in ways that maybe challenge some traditional views of mixed methods, but they're always creative and quirky ways. And I have some of those examples in the text. So it's been grand chatting with you, and I hope this helps you give an idea of sort of my bird's eye view of my textbook and ways that it departs from others, and I'm conscious of those and its key features.